Thank you everybody so much for joining us this evening. Welcome to myCAhub's very first live Ask Me Anything session, which is an exclusive benefit for members of the myCAhub Clubhouse. Thank you all for being a part of the Clubhouse. I've seen some of you engaging in the FAQ Center, in some of the other subgroups. I really appreciate it. I've been telling some other people that I should get a second degree in dentistry because getting CAs to engage is like pulling teeth. But so I really appreciate everyone who does engage and comment and ask questions. That is the whole point. We are to share knowledge, we are to understand, we are to gain something on the CA journey that we all share. So tonight we're joined by Yusuf Bodiat CA, Certified Director, newly published author, and all-round finance badass. Yusuf, thank you so much for giving us your time this evening. Thank you to everyone who is firstly here and who also sent through such thoughtful and engaging questions when you booked this call. I did share your questions with Yusuf beforehand, so he could get a sense of what it is that you'd like to discuss, what you're interested in. But the whole point of tonight's session is that you get access to Yusuf directly. So you'll have a chance, please ask him your questions in your own words, and you have an opportunity to engage with him properly. And I've been thinking about this a lot. You know, I want to have this as an ongoing series. I've got a couple of interesting guests already lined up for the future. And I've been thinking about the best way to structure these conversations, especially this conversation tonight. And I think rather than simply running through a list of unrelated questions, we're going to work through Yusuf's career journey because all the questions relate to that. And as we reach those relevant stages and turning points, I'll invite each of you to ask the questions that relates or connects to that part of his story. And you're welcome to ask, you know, as many questions as you want. You're not limited. There's no data bundles for questions over here. And then before we begin, I'd just like to briefly explain how Yusuf and I met. So I first encountered Yusuf when I was in my second year of articles at Deloitte. And I was working on an insurance client, and Yusuf was the CFO. And you know, he was high up there, and we were super impressed. And then we only saw him for about a month because when we came back in January, he had moved on to greener pastures that I'm sure he's going to tell us about. And it was only several years later when I attended the Top 35 Under 35 Awards evening in 2021 as a guest, when I knew nobody, when I knew no CAs, very different from today. And I arrived there and I was almost going to be a wallflower. But the one person I recognized was Yusuf, who was a finalist. And then I gathered my courage and I went over and I said hello. And we've pretty much had a blossoming friendship ever since then. So Yusuf, that's enough for me. Thank you so much for you being here. Let's take it back to the beginning. You completed your articles at Deloitte in FIST, in financial services, auditing primarily insurance businesses, my understanding. And you then stayed on as an audit manager before eventually making the move out of audit. And that's something a lot, if not most of the people here tonight are interested in. So I'm going to start with two questions, and then we'll take questions that come in from the audience. And just to kickstart things, what made you decide that you wanted to leave audit, and how did you approach making that transition? So why? You know, it's the why and the how.
Okay, good. Thanks, Mohammed, and thank you for that warm welcome. Before I answer your question, I need to just remind you about something also. So when we met at that Sidecar Top 35 Under 35 event in 2021, they obviously published an Accounting SA magazine after that. And there's a picture of the two of us somewhere in that magazine, just as a proof if anyone is wondering if we really met on that day. So yeah, it's been a long time since that day. Okay, so to jump right into the question, I spent 3 years at Deloitte in its financial services team, and as an audit clerk. And interestingly enough, we didn't get to choose our clients. And I was very fortunate in that I had a mix of clients. So banking, insurance, medical aids, pension funds, private equity, even a parastatal company. So I had a good range of clients. And you asked me the question, why did I leave audit? But I think maybe I'll tell you why I stayed in audit and then why I left afterwards. So it closes the circle quite nicely. So during my third year, I had a very, very good mentor, or a group of mentors that looked after us. They were junior or early managers. And the key theme or message that all of them shared with us is you need to consider staying on as an audit manager, because there are certain skills that you can get as an audit manager that you may not get in practice. And that skill is the people skills, the managing a team skill, all of those type of things. So you can broadly put it into the soft skill category. Now, there's a disclaimer or proviso with that. Because I stayed in audit, my friends who left audit and went into the industry quite quickly, their technical skills were tested to the extreme. But they often worked in a team of 1 or 2 or just themselves, whereas I worked with a team of 20 or 30 or 40 people, once you add in the specialists and everyone who's helping out. So I guess the distinction was I decided to make the trade-off between either going into practice or corporate world and learning the technical skills and doing it quite well, or staying in audit for a fixed period of time and getting those soft skills quite nicely polished, right? And to be honest, my intention was actually to stay at Deloitte or in audit forever and ultimately become an audit partner. So that was the intention. But someone actually mentioned to me and they said something along the lines of, so you studied for 4 or 5 or 6 years, however many years it took to study, and then we spent 3 years as an article clerk. So you need to give yourself a fixed term for this manager job as well, whether you like it or not. And the rule of thumb at the time was 2 years. I don't know why, but 2 years was the rule of thumb. And interestingly enough, when I started as a manager, 3 or 4 months later, I realized I don't want this job anymore. But I decided for myself, let me stay for those 2 years and get the skills I needed. Also, you see 2 or 3 cycles of an audit with each client. You don't just get to a client once and then never see them again. So I wanted to be an audit partner because I thought audit was for me. I realized very quickly that I didn't want to stay in audit for a few reasons. One is, in my first year as a manager, I got married. Obviously, lifestyle choices changed then. And soon after that, my first child was born. So there was a personal dynamic coming in there. The second reason why I left audit is, I think as an audit clerk, and you'd know this from an audit clerk perspective, we were very sheltered as to the office dynamics and politics within the office you're working in. And as a manager, you get to see all of those politics and issues and whatever it is as well. And that just doesn't suit my personality. So that was one of the other reasons why I decided to leave audit. The other reason is, unfortunately, in a consulting world, and I say consulting very carefully, it's not just audit, any consultant, you're always working on a deadline. And when you roll off one client, you go to someone else's deadline. It becomes quite exhausting after a while to work from deadline to deadline. And then the other part is just trying to manage so many different demanding clients at once. Again, was just becoming it wasn't what I was enjoying. So those are the reasons I decided to leave audit. But I also knew, and I'll close off with this last point, I also knew that I needed to stay for a fixed period of time before I left, just because I needed to hone in on those soft skills. And the other part that's quite important with audit, you get to network with very senior people in the early stage in your career. So I got to sit in audit committee meetings or with CFOs that otherwise I would never have gotten to interact with had I just moved out of audit quite quickly. So happy to stop there, and then let's see how the discussion goes on.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for that background. Let's open it up to the floor. So any questions, the hot topic, anybody that you want to ask Yusuf a specific question. So Yusuf, you made the transition just in terms of the how, right? So you were an audit manager, and then how did you find the job outside? How did you please ask on the chat, how did you find the job outside of audit? How did you get out of audit into a financial manager or something position? People are looking on LinkedIn. People are asking everybody, they're trolling job boards, they're on Clubhouse. How did you do it?
So the more broader answer is, it's very difficult to find a job, whether you're a CA or not. I mean, every single time over the past 10 years when I was looking for a new job, it's not as easy as people make it seem. Yes, we got CA qualification and all of this experience, but the job market is tough. That's just the first point I'll make. And I contacted recruiters, I started applying directly, but it's tough. And the honest answer that people gave me was, because I was an audit manager, I would have to start at the level of a newly qualified CA had I started working in corporate. So let's say, for example, I am an audit manager for 2 years and I start working in corporate, they're going to put me 2 years behind. Now, my personal opinion, that's nonsense, but that was the story that the recruiters told me. There was a bit of luck involved. So at the client where you and I met, Lion of Africa was actually my client at some point in time. So if we go back a few years before you and I met, Lion of Africa was a new Deloitte client. It was a tough audit. Things were just falling apart, lots of issues. And I was fortunate enough, number one, to be assigned to that audit, but also with a very, very good audit partner. So we got along quite well and we did a really good job on the audit. The next part is I got to interact with the CEO and the CFO and some of the audit committee members quite a lot. So I managed to build a decent reputation for myself. And it was just a random day where the CFO called me with some question. I can't even remember what it is. And at the end of the discussion, I was comfortable enough to ask him for career advice. And I said, I just need some advice from you. I'm looking for a new job, etc., etc., etc. And interestingly enough, he just said, I may have something for you. And there was actually an opening at Lion of Africa at the time. They didn't just give me a job. I had to apply, I had to do psychometrics, I had to go for 2 interviews, and they really made me work hard for it. To be honest, I think I had to work harder just because they knew me. But there was a bit of luck involved just because I asked, someone could say you make your own luck, right? So maybe not just luck involved. So I asked the right person, the right question at the right time. And look, the job was available. Had I asked that question 2 months before, 2 months after, the job wouldn't have been available.
Okay, excellent. So from what I'm getting, you made your interest known to a client, to someone at a client. You performed, you excelled well at this audit client, and then you developed a relationship with decision makers potentially at the client, and you expressed your interest or your willingness to learn about career movement. And by doing that, it made that person aware, the CEO aware, that you wanted to move out. And having been exposed to some of your work ethic and so on, he could then tell you, I guess, apply, which you would not have been aware of those jobs, right? Which is what I've heard before as well, that, the jobs are not posted. If by the time it's posted, it's late.
Yeah. And if I may just add one more part, he wasn't the first person I had the discussion with. I would actually go to my clients and in confidence, obviously with the ones that I could trust, speak to the CFO of a senior finance person and say, I'm thinking about a career transition. Please, can you give me advice? And I asked them the question, not because I wanted them to give me a job, but because I knew that firstly, they can give me good advice because they are on the other side. But secondly, and to something you mentioned, the jobs are not in the market, but their network of people know which jobs are in the market. So for example, if I'm a CFO at a big company and I want to replace or find a person, I will tell my friends that I'm looking for someone. And within a few days, your network gets to know if there's someone available. So you ask people for advice and guidance and counseling and mentorship just because it opens up many different discussions for you.
Superb, thanks. I'm going to ask Kusa Kambula's question from the chat. And he says, I want to know, how is the transition from audit to finance, especially with the systems that you need to adopt to or adapt to quickly? So people prefer typing. You can speak, but okay. Especially with the systems.
There's only 2 cameras on you and me.
No, it's fine. I don't mind the cameras, but okay. Anyway, especially with the systems that you need to adapt to quickly. So he's saying, in audit, we know the audit file, EMS at Deloitte, etc. But things like monthly, year-end close processes, and as a finance manager, and I guess also the strategy oversight part as a CFO. How do you learn that when you're not exposed to that in audit? So I think if you can start with the finance manager year-end close processes, and then maybe move on to touch on the CFO, the strategy part for now, and we come back.
Yeah. So, so I was on that audit for 1 full year, and I got the audit signed off. And I thought at the time I was a superstar, and I knew this client inside out, because the perception that audit gives us is we understand our clients from start to finish. And I remember walking into my new job in September 2016. So it's actually 10 years ago where I started this role. And on the first day, my CFO asked me to do a forecast or a budget or something. So a forward-looking projection. And I was so excited because I knew this company and I knew how it worked. And I prepared this most amazing, in my mind, Excel workbook, and it was so wrong. It was so wrong on every single assumption was wrong in that work paper. And I realized very quickly that I had no clue what makes the company tick. Right? I think there's an echo coming from someone's computer. So I realized very quickly I didn't know what makes the company tick. So I had to learn not the audit part of the company, but how the company works. Right? And the only way you can do it is by asking people questions. Now, I like knowing how different things in the business work. So I wouldn't just sit in finance and learn how the finance processes work. I would spend a lot of time in the claims and the operations and all of those departments, because whatever they do impacts the income statement and balance sheet. So I used to spend a lot of time with other departments just learning what they do. And I also had to just ask questions. So you're asking questions all the time, like, what's our deadline? When do we do this? And you actually make a lot of mistakes, and you miss deadlines. But I made a lot of mistakes, and I made missed a lot of deadlines because you don't know what happens. The final point I'll make is, and I've never said this publicly before, but I want to say it here, is I learned over time who I can trust and who I can't trust. Because in audit, like I said earlier, you sheltered. Everyone's your friend. Everyone has the same job and aspirations and things like that. And when I moved into corporate, I realized there were some people I could ask open and honest questions to, and they'll give me good advice. And to be brutally honest, there was a lady who sabotaged me in my job in the first year, because for whatever reasons, she gave me bad advice. And I remember missing one specific deadline because she told me the wrong date on purpose. So I know it's a loaded answer, but it's about just like learning the process by asking people. And look, the cool thing is with everything saved on a SharePoint or something, you literally just go through the documents over and over and try to figure out for yourself what works. The final point I'll make is there's no finance team I've ever seen that has a robust month-end process that's documented. So you can't find a document that says do this and do that. You need to ask the people what works.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. If I can just think about and summarize what you said, or what I understood from what you said there, as a direct answer as to how do you learn, it's to ask questions, right? It's to ask questions from people in the environment. And something else I guess I picked up is you weren't shy to ask questions, and maybe look as if you didn't know, because you didn't know what was going on. And you say there wasn't, a direct documented process for you to refer to, which sure, but you're right, I guess. It's tricky. So you were willing to be humble, I guess, and not say I'm a CA, or not say, they hired me, I shouldn't ask any questions. You were willing to do the work, ask the questions, get in there and understand it. Was there, before we go on, I'm going to go to the questions that have popped up here. Sergio asked a relevant question. We're going to get to the author question a bit later. There was just one other thing that you pointed out there that I just want your comment on, because it was a question that came through in the booking link, and that was about the office politics. Someone asked, how do I deal with office politics? And I guess, especially when you're on the way up, there's, a target on your back potentially. So if you can just give a comment there on how you deal with the office politics, which will answer that person's question as well in your experience. And then we'll come back to the questions in the chat.
Okay, so the short answer is I still don't know how to deal with office politics. You navigate it as you go along, right? The slightly longer answer is, over the past 10 years, I've had coaching in different shapes and forms, right? So I actually counted earlier today. I had 5 different coaches over the last 10 years. One of them was paid for by a company. The other 4 I contracted with myself, just because I realized I needed some sort of independent advice. Not anyone at my job, none of my friends, none of my family, someone who will tell me it is like it is, right? And I remember the office politics was something that often came up in coaching, and the coach often would not give me guidance, but help me navigate it and get around it. But office politics is something that gets worse, honestly, as you move up the ladder. Just because at the end of the day, and look, we can unpack this over entire discussion on its own, and I don't want to do that now, but think about it logically. Every single person is worried about themselves, and they're worried about themselves because they're worried about their bonus at the end of the year. It comes down to money. And if one person can get a better hand than another person, and in that case get a bigger bonus, some people, not all, would do that. So office politics is relevant because at the end of the day, it comes down to money and promotions and titles and ego and all of those things. But I'm still trying to learn how to navigate that.
Okay, thanks. No, thanks for the honest answer. Nile had a question just as we round off there on that transition, that earlier question. He says, I'm not sure if I missed the specific answer, but did they give you any specific advice about the transitioning process? Did your boss moving into your new company, and I guess also when you moved from one company to the next as CFO, because you moved from CFO to head of finance, right? Did you get specific advice about the transitioning process? Another question I get a lot is there a course I can do? Can I do CPD? Can I do a course or training or something to teach me how to be a finance manager? If you can just touch on both of those.
Okay, so the one thing I can say I learned is I'm happy to say I don't know when I don't know. So the CPD question, I don't know if there's a course. If there is, I would love to hear about it. When I moved from Deloitte to Lion of Africa, I didn't get any advice about how to transition because I didn't ask anyone. I thought, as I said earlier, I'm a rock star in this audit, so I can look after the client, which is my company, much better. And I learned very quickly I was quite bad at my job the first couple of weeks, right? When I moved from Lion of Africa to a company called FEM, I actually asked someone for advice. And this is where the connections work. So when I worked at FEM, there was a company very similar to FEM, and I knew the CFO. And I knew the CFO because that person was my client many years ago back at Deloitte. So remember I said about the connections and networking with people. And I initiated a coffee discussion. I went to his office and we sat, and he gave me his view on how to transition into this type of company. But he gave it to me from the perspective of the industry and the type of company it is, not how to deal with a CFO executive director role. So I guess the core message is if I had asked more people the right questions, I could have gotten better advice, because no one's going to walk up to you and say, I know you're going through this challenge, or I know you're going to be going through this challenge. Here's some advice for you. I mean, I'd love to meet people who do that, but often you need to ask for help. And interestingly enough, people are very, very happy to help, but you need to initiate that from your side.
Did your employer give you training for those roles?
Short answer, no. The long answer is most employers have induction of some sort, but maybe I haven't been exposed far enough there. But unless you have a person in the team who looked after the role that you are taking over, or there's a handover document or something like that, you kind of sit in the seat the day after the previous person left that seat. And in all of my roles, when I joined FEM at least, the person who I took over from left 3 months before I joined, and I've never ever spoken to that person in my life. So again, I unfortunately figured it out as I learned to swim after I was thrown into the water.
Okay, thank you so much. Bawinile, I hope that answers your question about any advice or training received during the transition process. I'm going to come back up here to, okay, excellent. I'm going to come back up here to Sergio Aitala. He's a myCAhub member as well, one of our OGs. And so Sergio says, I'm currently 4 years post articles and considering the move out of audit. So 4 years post articles, trying to move out of audit. What specific extra skills do I need to build beyond technical accounting? So what extra skills do I need beyond technical accounting? And what should my core focus be in the months leading up to this move? He's saying, considering that staying in audit for 4 years can sometimes lead to being pigeonholed. He's got like 4 questions here, but it's fine. We'll deal with them. So I think let's go for the first one. The first question he's saying here is, what specific extra skills do I need to build beyond technical accounting?
So look, I think the base level or the core skills you have by the time you finish articles, right? That's the point of articles, and we don't get to speak about it enough. We can complain about articles and auditing and all of that, but I believe that the training program we go through, and I think Mohammed, you covered it in some of your WhatsApp chats. It's second to none. So firstly, let's not underestimate the amount of knowledge and expertise we have after you finish that CA program and you get your CICA certificate, right? Sergio, if you know what industry you're going to go in, I would suggest just learning about the industry. So we know how IFRS works, and we know how financial statements work, and we know how to, and you should be quite good at managing teams and dynamics and all of that. But I would say it's learning the industry that you're going to go in, if you are fortunate enough to know what industry you're moving into, and learning the bigger picture about the industry. So like, I know it's going to sound very airy-fairy, but like if you look at a strategy document of a company, what moves the company forward, what takes it back, what external market forces exist, who are their competitors, etc., etc., etc. So it's understanding how the company is meant to, how the industry is making money and how they're losing money. So when you go to work, you're not speaking about IFRS and casting the financials, as silly as my examples are. You're speaking about what makes the company move. I hope I made someone laugh also.
Okay, excellent. No, thank you so much, Yusuf. If I can just hop in here, because I was having this conversation again with someone else today. And just in terms of skills you could build in general. And I was just saying that one of the core skills I've learned over my journey of entrepreneurship over the last 5 years, and it's been painful, it's been a real roller coaster. But one of the best skills I've learned is the skill how to sell, marketing, how to market a product, how to market a service, and how to sell, how to transition, how to convert. And those are one of those skills that are core skills, that are overarching, that you can use, that you can transplant it into any industry or product. It's not very specific. And if I'm just thinking, just what came to mind here about what specific extra skill, if I could say, it would be the skill of networking, right? The skill of, understanding where people are, putting yourself in that, in those rooms, in those situations where it opens you up, not being shy, always willing to take a chance, like Yusuf. Yusuf says there, I mean, if you look at the effort that Yusuf puts into, I guess, his career, he's been working with coaches. He asks people. I know this from meeting. He takes it seriously, you know, and analyzing it, reflecting it. I'm just saying, I think those skills, it's more, and that's a hard thing for most people, for most CAs to understand. I think because people think what differentiates you. I've been saying this in my talks recently, but people think what differentiates you is mostly another designation or qualification, because that's what we used to. We used to studying and getting, it's been a whole journey. But once you're there, if everyone's doing the same thing, I think focusing on those like networking or sales or something that most other CAs aren't doing may translate better. That's just my 2 cents over there. And then, Yusuf, the second question is, what should my core focus be in the months leading up to this move? So also, I guess, going back to your experience when you were trying to move out of audit, or were you necessarily looking a lot out of audit when that opportunity opened up? But what should you be focusing on leading up to making this move?
Yeah, and I think I touched on it. So Sergio, once you know which industry you're going into, just learn the industry. Because and look, I was in insurance at audit, and then I moved into insurance. So I thought I knew the industry, but I knew the technical part. I then had to learn how different competitors work and things like that. So yeah, I think I'm comfortable. I covered it. Unless Sergio, you feel I need to just go in a bit more detail also.
No, thanks, Yusuf. I'm happy with what you've already covered here.
Okay, good. And then just one more point, Mohammed, before I forget. So I put two links in the chat. So I put a post up a while back about why I left audit, and another one why I stayed in audit. The post is not important. If someone has time, go and look at the comments and the discussions that happened between that, because for me it was interesting to see how many people were struggling with a similar issue that I was, and you'll find some of the comments quite blunt, but some of them quite funny as well.
Definitely. There's a lot of comments that people will subtweet, audit in general. They won't say it directly to the audit manager or the audit partner or the person that's ruining their life. And I understand why. But we'll get a lot of these comments, which I think it's something to be said about the whole nature of the industry. If everybody is upset and making these similar comments, then but hey, we're just here to be the coolest place for CAs. I have no impact or anything on that. And then I think Sergio's last question that he's asked here, just to round that off, is it's about being pigeonholed. If you're in audit for 4 years, staying in audit for 4 years can maybe lead. Is it true that it can lead to you being pigeonholed? And what are the hurdles that could come with that? Yeah.
So I've got a real life example why the answer is no. So if you have to search who the CFO of King Price Insurance is, he used to be an audit partner at Deloitte. I think, Mohammed, when you were there, he was there also. It's Paul Stedhoff, right? This man worked in audit for years and years and years, and now he's the CFO of one of the most epic insurance companies in the country. So instead of answering the question directly, I used a real life example to show that he obviously networks very well and built relationships, etc., in order to get that role out of audit.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I knew Paul. Paul actually gave us our opening speech at Deloitte when I was there in my first week. And the whole reason they chose him, I think, is because he's so personable and open, and he's not shy. And it comes down to, making an impression. I'm just telling you, in general, a lot of people are afraid to do that. But it's so much easier. And rather than, and you could also be killing yourself and studying all the stuff. And if you're not displaying that, if you're not showing, what you're capable of, it's also a big issue, maybe in your own job, but I know in marketing, I know in general, that if you don't tell people about what you're doing, or why, or show reviews, or etc., people don't know. People don't know. They just don't know. You'll float into the ether. So my constant advice to CAs who are asking me for is to lean into your authenticity, lean into what makes, and be less shy to share who you are. Be less shy, because the more you share, the more you make those connections, things will come to you. I'm telling you, things will come to you, but you have to put the effort in at the beginning, and it's not easy. The other big reason is because rejection is terrible, but your perception of rejection is much worse than actually being rejected. And in fact, once you have been rejected, the best part is you're like, I didn't even meet this person in my life in any case. You don't want, why must you chase someone who doesn't want you, bro? But anyway, that again is some of my separate philosophy. Let's move to Ibrahim Nana's question here in the chat. Something a bit different. He says, my question is, where I've been out of external audit for a good while, I'm now currently in internal audit. He says, now that I have X amount of years post articles, how do I now transition? Right? So he's been out of external audit, he's in internal audit, he's been out for a while. How do I now transition? Especially since the transition to internal audit, so from external to internal, does not assist in obtaining some of the soft skills. So Yusuf, do you have any examples or any understandings of internal audit, any experience? What would you say to Ibrahim who wants to move from internal audit again out of audit?
Yeah, so probably 3 things I can mention. One is there's definitely people who have followed the journey that you want to follow, and you just need to find them and then ask them the question so you can learn from them. But that's not my easy way of not answering the question, Ibrahim. The second part is, if I look at like where people with internal audit skills work well, it's normally like in compliance departments I'm focused on financial services. Maybe my answers are biased towards that type of industry, but in a compliance or a risk department, that's where internal audit skills really, really, really work well. So I would say if you know what type of industry you'd like to move in and you'd like to move to a big group, find roles that speak to your skill set, which would be like risk and compliance or process engineering or whatever it is, and that gives you a step in to the company, and then from there you obviously need to start working your way to the different departments that you need. I think just like without thinking about it too deeply, but maybe a little bit, I think we underestimate our skills, whether it's audit or internal audit. Yes, I said earlier that when I joined my first company after audit, I had no clue what I was doing, but I also had a good amount of knowledge to get to that job in the first place. So I think maybe the final message I'll say is let's not underestimate what our capabilities are. You've got a decent amount of experience on your CV to start with.
Thank you, Yusuf. 100%. I have no experience with internal audit. It's positioning though, but again, I don't want to speak. Yeah. Did that answer your question sufficiently? I just want to check. Do you have any follow-up questions?
Not with regards to the internal audit, but it does answer to a certain degree. It's just like Yusuf said initially, that the current job market is a bit crazy, and yeah, transitioning sometimes it doesn't make any life any easier at the moment.
Yeah, I get, you can see that on the chat, man, 100%. I think a lot of people share the same sentiments. I also think it's interesting. It's indicative of a larger trend. I guess there's a lot of newly qualified CAs coming through in the pipeline, and then everyone's competing. Everyone's competing for the same jobs, but everyone wants to get out of audit. Everyone's competing. That's what competition does. Okay, cool. I think Yastika had a question here, just also on audit. He says, and then we'll round off the audit. We'll then move, I think, unless anyone else has questions. So I'm going to ask Yastika's questions. If you have any other questions on moving out of audit, please ask it now, and because we're then going to move on to the finance CFO part of Yusuf's journey, which is the next step. So just to come to Yastika's question, my question is, what is your advice for people who come from smaller or medium firms? Usually these opportunities come more easily for people who have done articles at the Big Four. It is true. It is true. I've seen that on job posts and stuff. Clerks, supervisor usually have a greater barrier to entry if they come from a smaller firm. And as she's saying, as I was just saying, most jobs state or ask for articles, preferably from the Big Four. So Yusuf, what do you do when you don't come from the Big Four? Do you have any advice? And maybe from the other side, is that something you look for? You were hiring. Why would you hire someone from Big Four? Would you not hire someone from Big Four? But I think answer her question first, and you can come to that.
Yeah, so I think it's a pity, firstly, that people put that requirement, because, as I said earlier, when you get a CASA, you're going through such a rigorous program that the competency is there, regardless of the type of firm you're in. Look, I think it's a bias, because a person is hiring and they went to a Big Four firm. They may feel that a Big Four is superior, which I don't believe so, but that could be a bias on the manager's side. Unfortunately, if it does specifically state Big Four, and they're quite strict about their recruitment process, they're going to disqualify you in step one. I would still apply for the sake of it, because you don't know how many applications they get. I mean, if we get time, we'll speak about non-executive roles. I'm actually applying for a non-executive role where they're specifically looking for a specific type of person. I don't meet that requirements, but I still applied, because you never know what value you can give them that they don't know about. Obviously, you need to get to that interview point where you can demonstrate and show off what you're all about. It goes back to, again, the networking, knowing which roles actually want people from any audit firm. My personal view is that you can get a person who did articles at Deloitte, and this person is brilliant. You get another person who did articles at the same time, it's just not as good. And similarly, in a smaller firm or medium firm, good and bad. So it's not about the firm, it's about the person. So look, I know that's maybe a bit of a wishy-washy answer. Sorry, Yastika, but I think there's a bias, and you probably need to just apply to the companies that apply to all, but focus your attention on the ones that don't put that restriction on there. Obviously, once you leave audit and you start working, then that as your career progresses, where you did audits actually doesn't matter that much as it does earlier on in your journey.
Would you say, just to ask, because I think there's definitely the bias, right? Would you say it's worth, and it seems like I know you disagree, or you agree that it sucks, right? But it doesn't solve the issue. Do you know what I'm saying? That out there. Would you advise perhaps that it may be potentially worthwhile taking a finance manager position at a smaller company if you wanted to really make that transition? Get out, basically get your foot out anywhere. And then is it easier to make, just from your experience and to make a transition from finance manager to bigger finance manager, then to controller? Or or is there, what's the hope?
I think you hit the nail on the head. So maybe the starting point is you need to know where you want to end, and you're not going to get your dream job straight out of audit, right? I think That's something I can honestly say. If you do, then it's fantastic. So you need to think about that long-term planning. So if you want to be a CFO at a JSE listed company in 20 years time, what steps do you need to take? And there's probably like 5 or 6 or 10 different combinations or permutations that you can think of. So maybe getting a junior role in a big company or a more senior role in a smaller company could work. Unfortunately, we can't. It's easy to look back and say, I should have done this or I should have done that. And when you're looking forward, we always think we're making the wrong decision. So look, I think it's trying to figure out where you want to be in the future and seeing if that path will maybe take you there at some point.
Yes, Tika, did that answer your question? Do you have any follow-up questions? You'll just let us know in the chat. That's cool. I'm just seeing through here. Okay, cool. We're gonna come back to the book one. That's at the end. We'll get to that at the end. But cool. We've covered all of these questions. Thank you. Finance strategy. We're gonna come to finance strategy. Okay. Okay, cool. Okay, we'll come to the transition. Just one second. Networking, not supported. Okay, let's do these 2 questions and then yeah, we'll give it another 3. I just want to touch on, we'll want to use the hour to speak about everything, and then people can jump in on their questions and whatever. So this question, we're just going to finish the last 2 audit questions, is I'm just over a year post articles and post qualifying. I left audit for a remote opportunity that I soon realized was not a good fit for me. Okay, and finding the next role has proved to be so difficult. What words of advice would you give on networking for someone out of audit? It certainly is a bit easier networking within audit. As you mentioned, there's more access to senior business leaders. And I'm just going to combine that with another question about networking. So the question is about networking, and it's about how would you network out of audit? Where are the opportunities to find those people? Whereas in audit, you may have access to the direct, the finance when you're there personally. This person has been working remotely and is not getting that access. How do they get that access?
So let's give a broad view of that, right? So networking is the key part here, right? And within audit, you have functions and events, and you're within your circle of people. And I hope I'm answering the question that I think I'm answering. But within the finance community, there are quite a lot of events that you can attend, whether it's free or paid for events, where you have the opportunity to network. So, for example, there's this organization called myCAhub that has a networking opportunity. And you're smiling, but that's actually a really good networking opportunity because you're surrounded by like-minded individuals. You think about, there's this finance Indaba that happens in October. There's thousands of people that go to the Sandton Convention Center, and often people use it to get a day off work and go there for fun. Networking is not easy because when there's hundreds of people there, you don't know who to speak to and who not to. So I can't tell you how to network. I can't advise how to network because that's like a personal thing and you need to figure out what works for you and what doesn't. But I think know that there are many different events out there. You just have to, and maybe on the myCAhub group, Mohammed, over time, we can maybe put a list of events when they're coming up to help people, because I only find out about events because someone tells me about it. And then I'm on their mailing list and I find out every year after that. But I think if you don't know about those events, you think there's no events. But there are actually too many events to think about. It's just we are, within our circle, nobody speaks about it, if that makes sense. But I think maybe what we can do to give value, as I find out about events, we can post it on your groups.
That's actually a great idea. That's a great suggestion for future improvement. It's given me a nice idea. So yes, we can definitely post the events. And I have to agree. With Yusuf's comments, Ayabulela. You see, the thing is, the honest answer is you have to make an effort, bro. And you have to think outside the box, and you have to be creative about it. And so if that means, and I know this because I've just done it myself. I went to the finance Indaba. There's the finance Indaba, the HR Indaba. There's the money summit. Like, you have to go there. You have to pitch up, and honestly, with no expectations, just with the thing that I'm. And so another question here, Yusuf. I'll give my insights after this, and I think you did touch on it a little bit. But I'm gonna press you. I'm gonna press you because I think you have some value, you have some knack to it. And the question is, from what I'm gathering, networking is such an important aspect of finding your perfect post. Not only your perfect post, everything in general, it's just who you know makes life so much easier. So the question is, how do we start with this, especially since some of us may be introverted, right? And so you said, I don't know how to do networking, but how do you do it? How do you find those people? Yeah.
Okay, so I don't like going for events. So I am going to be at the Finance Indaba for the whole day. I don't enjoy it. I am emotionally exhausted after the day is finished, and I need a sick day after that. So let's just put it out there that CAs in general, very generic view, we don't like to go for these events. You need to force yourself. Right now, something I realized literally a week ago is when I used to go for these events, I thought to myself, if I'm spending so many hours there, I need to speak to so many people and that will be successful. And that's how my battery was drained completely. And what I realized literally a week or two ago was I only wanted to speak to 2 people at that one event. And I got there and I focused all my energy just to speak to those 2 people. And I left after that. And when I got there, I was playing on my phone, checking my emails, pretending like I'm busy because I didn't want to speak to anybody. And I only spoke to those 2 people and I got my value out of it and I left. So that was like a key turning point for me, like so recently, where I always thought networking means speaking to as many people as possible in the smallest amount of time. Whereas for me, it was, I want to speak to that person. So I'm going to go to the Finance Indaba to speak to Mohammed from myCAhub. I'm going to make sure I speak to him, buy him a coffee and get as much as I can out of him and give him as much as I can as well. And then I've succeeded in what I wanted to do. And then obviously it gets easier, but it doesn't get easy. Maybe just keep that with you.
Brilliant, 100%. I totally agree. If I can just offer 1 or 2 points from my side. The first thing is, you're gonna be shy and it's gonna pain until the pain of approaching and make is lower than the pain of losing out on what you could have, right? On all the potential. Because you're afraid, I guess, potentially of being rejected, of being judged, of being shunned. And that pain of rejection, it's stopping you, from achieving, in my opinion, the overwhelming or the eternal, the infinite potential of what could be, And I know this from my own experience when I saw Yusuf at that, when I went to the top 35 awards evening and I knew nobody, and there were all these super amazing CAs there, like CEOs and CFOs and this and that. And I was just 1 year out of articles. And I was like, am I just going to sit here and do nothing? And then I saw Yusuf and his wife. And I went over and I started making jokes. I was like, I'm sure you remember. I'm sure you don't remember me.
No, maybe just to add on that, right? So I was standing there, not one, also awkward, nervous, not knowing who to speak to. And as much as I made it easier for you, you also made it easier for me, because once you have a person with you, it makes it easier. So look, maybe, sorry for cutting you off there, but maybe take a friend with you, because always when you have a person to support you, it makes it a little bit easier than going alone to these things.
Definitely. And I think at the very core, one thing that's also just worked for me, if I can just slip it in there, is, at the networking event, and Yusuf, I think you also made this point recently when we chatted, don't have the whole conversation at the networking event, right? Don't go deep, because there's a lot going on. People are moving around. There's stuff happening. Get the lockdown, get the WhatsApp number, get the lockdown for the next event, for the next meeting, for the coffee follow-up, right? And offer to take the person out for lunch, offer to take them out for coffee. That 100, 250 bucks is going to be it could be the best investment you ever make. And don't be shy. And the last thing I have to say is, if someone does reject you, and if someone is being neskierig and weird, you don't need them in your life. Let them go. You don't want those people that are going to be weird to you in your life. Better to find out who they are and let them go early than chase after people that don't want you around. But that's
Fully agree with you.
Okay, super. And then so we've knocked out the networking ones. And then Brian has a question. I know Brian is also a myCAhub member. We're just gonna we're now moving from out of audit. Brian has moved out of audit. I think he's in the Netherlands. He says, I moved out of audit industry about a year ago, and I still feel like I'm in the transition phase. Shifting from historical analysis to a more forward-looking focus has been a big change, and time feels like the main constraint. More than in audit. Okay, that's crazy, bro. But to Brian, he says time feels like the main constraint. He says, I'd be interested to hear how your time management evolved during your transition, particularly in the first year. So between audit and finance, how did your time management evolve? That's what Ryan's asking.
My time management is so bad. I'm the worst person to speak about that. But you know, when you go on your computer and you look at Teams and you see who's online, I was always that person online late at night, which is so unhealthy because we always working. I was always playing catch up because, and maybe I'm not answering the question, which I'll answer now, because whenever someone needed something or asked for something, I would say, yes, I'll deliver. And you overpromise and you want to deliver at some point. So my time management was never good because I was always working. But it was fine because a lot of the time when I was at the office, I was speaking to people. I wasn't at my computer working. I was speaking to people, getting information, and then obviously catching up at nighttime or on weekends. So I'm not saying that that is good. I'm just saying that's the way I try to manage it. And I mentioned earlier, I've dealt with many coaches over time. One was the office politics, and the other one that coaches tried to help me with and gave me good advice, but just I didn't implement the advice they gave, was the time management part, where you're supposed to book time in your diary and do things when you're supposed to, etc., etc. But maybe I can say, Brian, sorry, I'm not the person. I'll give you bad advice with that one.
Okay, thank you. Ryan, do you want to ask any follow-up questions on that? You know, Yusuf is an honest person, so I appreciate that he's being honest about that. Do you want to ask any follow-up questions? Okay, you let us know in the chat if you do. Another Yusuf has a question here, and then this we're gonna if there's any other questions, please drop them in here. We'll come back, but we're just making the slow journey forward to CFO and so on. And he's just asking you one last thing about a transition, which is, what can you do if in offshore audit, right, with only overseas experience, with a 3-month notice period? As most jobs I've applied for say, basically 3 months is too long, and to resign with no job offer can be scary. So from my understanding, he's got a 3-month notice period. Jobs that he applied for say it's too long, the notice period. To resign with no job offer, then what would you do in the situation?
So if I start at the end of the question and work backwards, yeah, to resign with no job offer is scary, and that's something that I wouldn't suggest to anyone unless you have sufficient savings to keep you through a time when you're not working. This thing about notice period, it's an interesting one, because when you're working for a company, they want you to work your notice up until the last day at 5 o'clock that evening. But when you join a new company, they want to get you there as quickly as possible. And unfortunately, it's a negotiation between your current employer and your new employer. So just a real life example, when I left FEM, I was on a 3 calendar month notice, which means your notice starts for 3 months from the first day of the next month. And because I resigned on like the 10th of March or whatever it was, I effectively served 3.5 months notice, which is ridiculously long. My employer wasn't willing to reduce that for various reasons, which I agree with, but my new employer was willing to wait for me. But that was like after many, many discussions where I asked my current boss, can I leave earlier? I asked my new boss, are you willing to wait for me? And it's because it's a contractual obligation, you have to serve your notice. You can't change that. But I also believe that you can do things to make your notice shorter. So you do a proper handover document. You make sure you wrap up all of your audits in a certain time. You line things up so that whoever takes over before your notice is finished isn't struggling and shouting at you when you're not there. So I think I said you need to negotiate, but you need to create your negotiating power. And by that, you need to make the lives of your current employer a lot easier, to show that this guy actually did a lot of stuff to make it easier for us. Let's cut the 3 months to 2 months or something like that. In practice, I've often seen where companies do reduce the notice period. However, I guess the one disclaimer, Yusuf, is I know US markets work differently. So I know in South Africa, if you ask your boss nicely, they could reduce the notice period.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, and he says he's happy with that. And again, just in general, if I can just touch on, it's tough. And you know, I see that you're saying you're negotiating and you can't get that 3 month. I personally, again, feel it comes down to who you know. If in your circle you're able to, leverage up someone who has an opportunity, etc., etc. But you see, the network doesn't help you when you're in trouble. Or you can't go and build a network when you're in trouble, when you need it. You need to build a network before, so that when things happen, that's when you draw on them. In the good times, or when things, when you're offering value, when you don't need value, so that when you do need value, you can tap into it, and there's like a store of reserve value. But again, that's just that. Okay, Yusuf, I think let's move on then to I don't see many questions here about CFOs or boards. Just if you want to drop any questions about CFO or boards, please, you can do that in the chat, or if someone wants to talk, nobody wants to talk, so that's cool. Let's move on to the book, right? So Komotso Mokabane says, good evening. Yusuf, can you share a bit about your journey of being an author of your book? What was the inspiration? How did you figure out your way around finding the right resources, like a proofreader and a publishing company, etc.? So a couple of stuff in that question, journey of the book. So first question, what was the inspiration of your book, bottom line?
Okay, so I started writing a lot a few years ago. So LinkedIn posts and articles, so I started enjoying that. And what happened in February 2025, we had our budget speech like we normally do in every February. It's always in February for some odd reason. And in 2025, the budget speech wasn't presented. Right? And I don't know if for just those who can't remember, what happened is the government of national unity couldn't agree on certain things. The VAT rate was meant to be increased by 2%. And I think 1 hour before the budget speech, the meeting was postponed or cancelled. And it was a circus, right? So what I did, and I'm going to put links in here to try and help people with timeline and background information. So I wrote an article. The VAT rate increase is basically going to make poor people poorer. Right? And I wrote that article soon after we found out that the Minister of Finance was planning to increase the VAT rate. Then a few weeks later, the budget speech was actually tabled. And in my personal opinion, it was quite slim in that the VAT rate was still going to increase, which changed subsequently. I think social grants or a few other things were going to change. And then I wrote an article, it was a more provocative one, and I'll put the link up here also. It's called South Africa Needs a CFO More Than a Finance Minister. I basically said we needed someone like us running the Ministry of Finance. And that was a turning point for me. So that article actually turned into the book concept. So I published the article on the 6th of May, 2025. And I always use this example. I was on this longest plane trip ever. I was flying to the tip of West Africa. So I was in the plane forever. And on the plane trip back, I decided, no, I need to do this in a book. And a few days later, I took my computer out and I just started working on it. So that's the inspiration behind the book, right? Research. I had to research so much. So writing the book was the easiest part. I had to figure out how to publish it. I had to speak to publishers. And again, I use a lot of AI tools to help me search further. So I asked ChatGPT, how do I publish a book? And it gave me answers that were wrong. And then I had to ask it a better question, because whenever you ask the wrong question, it gives you the wrong answer. And then I found out there's two ways to publish. One is self-publishing, where you do it yourself and you pay for it yourself, which I ended up doing. And the other is finding a big publishing company that can do it for you and pay for it. The problem with the big publishing companies that I had is because I wasn't an author at that point, they didn't want to bother with my book. And secondly, if they did bother with my book, I had to guarantee them so many thousand copies would be sold. And Mohammed, you were at my launch. You saw how happy I was that people showed up, because I was just happy that one person bought the book. Right? So that's just the background behind it. I was fortunate enough to find a publishing company. So I'm a self-publisher. I find a publishing company. I paid them money to help me. They then suggested an editor. They suggested a publicist. They suggested who prints for me, etc., etc., etc. So I basically became this like project manager for my book. So apart from just authoring the book and writing the manuscript, it was the easy part of that. I had to learn how to do that. I mean, to the extent where I had to learn how the courier guy works so that I could create an account. So if I sell a book through my website, I know how to get it to the person quite quickly. I mean, I put trademarks in the book, and I had to find trademark attorneys to help me trademark it properly. We got little bookmarks made. I had to find printing companies that could help that. So it's, I'm cutting the answer quite short because there's so much we can share on that. But it's basically just a lot of research, and again, a lot of asking other people. What I can suggest, and to be honest, because I don't want to like not answer the question properly, I'm happy to like share more information with like a few group of people who want to know more about that, because the journey to write the book was easy. I wrote the article on the 6th of May. I published the book on the 4th of February the next year. So it took 10 months, basically, 10 months of hard work, all in my own time, weekends, public holidays, late nights. I'm happy. I don't know, Mohammed, if you want to ask get follow-up questions, because this can go like so many different ways.
I think, thank you. No, thank you so much. I think from what I got there, I do have 1 or 2 questions to laser onto. I think extract a bit more from that, which was, so the first thing I get is to the inspiration, right? It was your opinion. I think what happened also, or that I can pick up, is you weren't shy about sharing your opinion and your thoughts on LinkedIn. So you also consistently post on LinkedIn, and by sharing those thoughts on LinkedIn, you also got a taste of what people would respond to, right? You weren't shooting into the ether and being like, I don't know if this is going to work, because there was such a response, and you say perhaps controversial, whatever response to your CFO should run it instead of a finance minister, that gave you some insight as to what could hook, you know? So that's what I took from there. I think, you know, it's a great point in terms of testing, and you don't have to have a separate blog. You can use LinkedIn as your own blog, you know. LinkedIn is amazing because that's where the CAs are.
If I may, just one thing to protect everyone. So when I worked at FEM, I was very restricted as to what I could and couldn't post, and articles that I was allowed to write, etc., etc. So the company was very conservative about what we could publish. So if you had to look at my LinkedIn timeline from the beginning of time, when I changed jobs in July 2024, my LinkedIn strategy changed completely, just because I moved from one employer who said, don't say anything silly, moving to another employer that says, please post as much as you can, because if your profile gets elevated, the company's profile gets elevated as well. But just to protect everyone again, because you can say one sentence that's understood differently and it can get you into a lot of trouble. There's still a nice disclaimer at the beginning of the book that says those words are mine and mine only. It's not associated with the companies I've worked for, I've ever worked for, stuff like that. So if you're working for a traditional corporate or an audit firm, just check internally what the rules are about that. So if you're working for a bank, for example, and you were to post something about financial advice, and a person does something silly on their own merit and loses money, you don't want your bank to get into trouble because of that LinkedIn post or that Instagram post because of that. So yeah, I know it's not part of the question, but just a word of caution around who your employer is. Because I'm working for myself now, I kind of can do what I want. Final point. I have made a conscious decision not to post about 2 things. One is religion, second is politics. So as much as the book speaks about the CFO finance minister, I don't speak about politics or religion anywhere publicly, because those are 2 sensitive topics I don't ever want to mess around with.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you. And then just to get, I think, into the nitty-gritty, right? So you wrote, you had the idea. Did you write the first draft? Let's say you wrote the first draft. How did you find the publisher? So I know you said you did the ChatGPT stuff. How did you know which publisher to go with? How did you find the publisher?
Okay, so the first step was self-publishing or traditional publishing, and I tested both. Right, so I found out who are the self-publishing companies in the country, and I found out who the traditional publishing companies were. And based on that, I made a short list for myself. I think I had 3 and 3, right? And what's interesting is I'm a person who wants a response immediately. So with the self-publishing companies, I sent each of them an email, or I filled out a form on their website, and only one got back to me. And because the other 2 didn't get back to me, I thought I can't work with people who don't respond to me. So that was the first step. But I then had a meeting with the organization. Interestingly enough, I've never met any of them. They all work in Cape Town and I'm in Joburg. But we had lots of Zoom and Teams meetings. And I spent a lot of time learning about them, learning to trust them, doing research on the person who runs the company, just so that I could get comfort as to how it works. It wasn't an easy journey. There were lots of hiccups along the way and lots of arguments and discussions and debates. But I was comfortable that I was working with the right people, because I did the most intense due diligence you can think of before I gave them any money to help me with this.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. And I think you did say that you were potentially open to sharing with those interested. you know, I mean, you say you've done the research, and you know, if someone maybe were to ask you for assistance, you'd be happy to share that. But we'll put your contact details after that, and then people can get in touch with you for more around the publishing process.
Yeah, and I put a lot of links on the chat because there's one article where I wrote about this whole process, so I put it on there. That article is fairly fresh, and then the entire book launch also, it's on. We recorded the whole thing, so if somebody wants to watch and listen to the questions that were asked, there's also more information in there.
Okay, excellent. And then I just wanted to ask you another question that did come through that also from my side that I think is interesting, which is your strategy around publishing the book. And you know, you've got the book out there. Are you looking to supplement your income with book sales? How hard is it to make book sales? You know, and so on. Is it worth it trying this out for, you know, I'm sure you did it take a lot of upfront investment to get to the stage? Just some insights around that.
Yeah. So if you were to use a traditional publisher, they would upfront all the money and you would get royalties or commission or whatever afterwards. Because I went self-publishing, I had to put the money upfront, so I had to use some savings for that. It was a conscious decision because it's not a cost, it's an investment, right? The second part is I learned very quickly that selling books don't make you money. So I'm still in the negative on the book income statement, if you want to call it that, right? So again, the second conscious decision I made is that the book is not going to make me a millionaire or even anything close to a break even, right? The book is not meant to generate a profit, but it's meant to open up opportunities, hopefully, for me in some shape or form. So whether it be speaking engagements where I can take the book with me or building credibility. So, I mean, someone said, my wife actually said this to me, it's like the ultimate business card. So instead of giving someone a business card, you give them a book, right? But I think it was a conscious decision. Unless I sell thousands of copies, I'm not going to make money off this book. And even if I sell thousands of copies, it's not going to turn the dial significantly. So the purpose was different from monetary purpose.
That's amazing. And I just want to point this out. Do you see how sharp that is, in my opinion, right? Do you see how clever or intelligent that is as a strategy? That he's created, the whole point of creating the book is to have something credible that points to your credibility. You see someone wrote the book, you're like, oh my God, that's dope. Immediate credibility that he can also give as a gift. You know, I know you've been giving books away left, right, and center. And it also not only gives you that step into the room, it makes someone feel special. It makes someone feel valued. It's something personal coming from you, leading to those potential opportunities. I think it's very sharp.
And just to be clear, I'm not, also, it's a very deliberate decision not to just give books away, like you say, left, right, and center. So if there is, let me apologize. It's just that if there's a reason to give someone a book, I'll give it. But I'm not just going to give someone a book because they want one. I mean, they can go to exclusive books and pick one up. So there has to be a reason, a mutual beneficial reason for both of us why they get a book.
Sure, but it's very targeted, right? And it's a targeted, excellent gift. I just think it's such a good strategy. Whereas people would assume, oh, now you need to make money on the book. But the book is the marketing strategy for Yusuf Bodiat.
And look, the final point on the book, to be fair, I did get a few small bulk orders, and there's one of the audit/consulting firms in Joburg actually bought like a decent amount of books. And that was special because they gave me the names of every single person who's going to get the book. I wrote the person's name with a message. I put it in nice packaging, got it hand delivered there. So there's like different parts to this because some people who got the book, I don't even know who they are. And apart from the few who actually sent me a message to say, thank you, they got the book.
Amazing. Okay, cool. Everybody, thank you so much. We're going to stay on. Yusuf, I know you said you're going to stay on. It's now 10 past 10. For everyone else who's interested and wants to still ask questions, I'm going to go through one or two of the questions that weren't covered here just to make sure that we touch on. I think there was one about finance strategy that Yusuf, you and I will just go through to make sure the person is covered. I just want to, in terms of the giveaway for this evening, which is Yusuf's book, The Bottom Line, instead of just running a random giveaway, you know, to all attendees on the call, there we go, it's out over there. We're still going to stay on the call after this. This is just to, you know, get people to round up for those who want to drop off. We have other stuff to do. So the way we're going to run this, right, is like I said, I'm all about engagement. We're all about networking and engagement and getting your thoughts. So we're going to run a random draw from people. You have to drop in the chat what your bottom line is, right? Please drop in your chat. We're going to speak about the board appointment. We'll get to the board
Yeah.
appointment while we're talking about this. But please just drop in the chat if you'd like to be considered for the book delivered to your door anywhere in SA. Drop my bottom line, what you learned from this chat, because Yusuf's book is the bottom line. What your bottom line is, my bottom line. Just one or two thoughts, what you learned from this chat, and then we'll run the raffle from that. While that's going on, let's speak to Nompilo's question here. And Nompilo says, I wanted to check, Yusuf, how did you get your first board appointment? Was it through networking or directly applying? How did you get your first board appointment?
Okay, so just background, the reason I wanted to become a non-executive director. So many years ago, I had a very good non-exec who told me, please become a non-executive director. And I asked him why. And he said, so that I can view the company the way he sees it, because the way an executive sees a company is totally different from the way a non-executive sees a company. The second part is when I looked at who the normal non-executive director is, it's normally, from the few people I met, people who were ending their careers, and then CAs can't stop working. Even when you retire, you need to continuously work, right? Until the day your brain stops. So often it's people who get to the retirement age and then become non-executive directors. So people much older than a lot of us on the call. And I said to myself, I don't want to wait until I'm 55 or 65 to become a non-exec. I'm going to start it a lot earlier. So that's just the background as a base point. So you have to apply to become non-executive directors, or people can offer you a role. Both of them work in different ways. My first role I applied for, and I'm on the board of a company called Leza, L-E-Z-A. That company owns the brand called LegalWise. Now, again, it goes back to something we spoke about a long time ago, the networking. LegalWise was my audit client 12 years ago. So when I sent my application, it wasn't, dear LegalWise, I am Yusuf. It's, hi LegalWise, remember me. I mean, I'm being sarcastic, but that was basically it. So it was a familiar face and name that they saw, but I still had to go through the normal application process. So there is an institute called the Institute of Directors. They have different training courses, and I've gone through one of their training courses called the Certified Director course. The next one I need to do next year is a Chartered Director course, and it's kind of like having a CASA or CIMA or CFA, something behind your name. And because of being part of the IOD, where I also pay a fee every year, like we pay for a SICA, I get access to vacancies. So whenever there's a vacancy that they're aware of, they'll send an email to say, here's the vacancy, would you like to apply? And I apply very carefully to the ones I want to be considered for. Unfortunately, a lot of those emails go to a dead end and nobody responds. So it's about, again, networking. People need to know that you are willing to be a non-executive director. And unfortunately, sometimes you need them to phone you rather than you phoning them. So maybe a few quick points, Mohammed, before I round up. At one of my companies, we had a list of our non-executive directors on each committee, and we had a succession planning list. So if Mohammed is the audit committee chairman and he were to resign, who would we replace him with? And we had 2 or 3 people's names. The key part I want people to remember is the people whose names were on the list didn't know that their names were on that list. So we had like a hit list of people who we recruit. So it's about their market, their industry reputation and what people thought about them that we had them on the list. But now again, that doesn't solve the problem or the question that was asked. So I would suggest applying for roles as non-executives on non-profit companies first, because they are pro bono, so you're not going to get paid for it. But there's a lot of non-profits that need help, and they need help more operationally than strategically, and it gets your way into that circle of that inner circle that most of us are never in. And it then gives you some sort of credibility because you're building your board experience. You know how to handle yourself in a meeting because you have to ask different questions compared to being an executive, etc., etc. But here's the key part. Remember I said you want to be on those lists that people have that no one knows about? If you are sitting on a non-profit board, there is definitely someone else sitting on that table with you who is a director of a listed company somewhere. And what happens is you go to the board to obviously add value and help with the strategy, and you've got a fiduciary responsibility and all those things, but you're also demonstrating to your other board members who you are and what your value is. So when there's a vacancy at another board, they'll know that this person is on my non-profit. They kind of know what they're doing, so let's consider them for a board appointment. And that's when the phone rings and they ask you. So very, very roundabout answer, Mohammed, but it's something, again, you probably need to do 20 different things in order just to get one board appointment. There's no one answer to get that. I've been trying for the longest time, and it's difficult. I'll be honest. It's getting a board appointment is more difficult than getting an executive role, in my opinion.
Wow, thank you. I think there were some genuine nuggets there. Nompilo, any follow-ups on that? Are you happy with that?
Very happy. Thank you.
For the question.
Pleasure. Okay, cool. Awesome. I've gotten everyone's bottom line over here. I think let's run the raffle. I just typed it into a random raffle generator. Let's run the raffle so we can announce. And then Yusuf, you and I will stay on the call, take any further questions if that's cool with you.
100%. And what I've done is I've put it in the chat. I'll put it again. My email, if anybody needs to contact me afterwards. LinkedIn also, you can send me a direct message. And cell phone number, please only WhatsApp, no phone calls. So you can contact me if you need to. Because I also appreciate that we're always limited by time. So if there's a follow-up question or a thought that you think about tomorrow after you reflect on today or whatever it is, we can continue the discussion.
100%. And then we'll be sharing your contact details in a follow-up email with everyone if they'd like to reach out directly. So that's super. Okay, so I took down everyone who wrote their bottom line. We put them here in the random wheel generator. We're going to click to spin and award the bottom line book.
I like your transparency, so no one say we cheated with this here.
And the funniest part is that Brian lives in the Netherlands. Brian. Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. Brian, do you have someone you want to give it to here in South Africa? Is he here?
Hey, sorry, I was typing when I could have just put on the microphone. It's been a long day. Mo, let's connect offline about that.
Yeah, send me a message also. We can sort it out.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, but thank you so much for participating. We will honor that 100%. Thank you everybody so much for your time in joining our first live AMA. I hope it was insightful. I hope you got some value. Yusuf, you've done an excellent job. I really appreciate all of your time. Thank you for engaging and being part of the myCAhub Clubhouse. If you'd like to drop off, you're more than welcome to. Otherwise, as I said, Yusuf and I will stay on the call to ensure all the questions are answered.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Pleasure. Thank you for your time. Oh, Yusuf, where can we get the book? Yusuf Bodiat CA.
Sorry. Yes. So I put so many links on this chat. I've got a website. You can buy it from me directly, or exclusive books. If they don't have stock, please tell me, because they need to have stock of the book all over the country. But
we'll put it in the follow-up email. We'll put all the links, everything, the book, everything in the follow-up email.
Yeah. So my website or the bookstore, or just send me a message.
Yeah. 100%. Cool. Thank you so much, everybody. A pleasure. Any further questions?